Rich, thank you so much for coming here and being on the Herculean podcast. It's a real joy to have you on this very warm summer's day.
Look how frizzy my hair is. I know you can't really see that, but it's too warm for curly hair. It's far too warm. But thank you so much for asking me in.
Not at all. You've had an incredibly successful broadcasting career, but what was it actually like carrying a secret identity through all those high profile moments?
It was, I think, the sort of the high profile moments later on, more recently in my career, I was less concerned about it, but certainly early on, I remember interviewing people who were also gay, and I used to put this weird laddish kind of act on to try and prove something. I don't know what I was trying to prove. It was all, I'm embarrassed by it now looking back because it was probably quite embarrassing. But yeah, it was strange because I was putting an act on. My whole career, that's all I've done. I've just put an act on. And that's what you would expect when you put the radio. You don't want somebody to come on and be, if they're having a bad day, tell you about it. You put an act on, and doing all of the interviews and all the shows I've presented, all of the radio that I've hosted over the years has been a face. And this Rich Clarke person, because the other thing is, if you work in radio, I assume in television as well, no one calls you Rich or Richard, they call you Rich Clarke. Hi Rich Clarke, how are you today? How was your evening yesterday, Rich Clarke? Which has always made me laugh, but it kind of makes sense because I was Rich Clarke. I wasn't Richard, as my mum calls me and my friends call me. I was Rich Clarke.
Did you find yourself adopting another persona as a result? Do you think you were able to detach and almost dissociate from Richard?
Yeah, I used to work in Leicester Square, and I used to present on a very big radio station. In fact, I was presenting on every commercial radio station in the UK, and I did the chart show on Sunday afternoon. And I would walk into Leicester Square. No matter how I was feeling, I'd get in the lift. And I don't know whether you remember this, but there used to be a program called Stars in Their Eyes, and the doors used to slide back, and there was a big smoke, and they would step out. Tonight, Matthew, I'm going to be in. They'd just walk through. And when the lift doors opened, that's what it felt like. It felt like I then switched on Rich Clarke and, hi, how are you? Lovely to meet you. Are you? How was your evening? And then go on air and you meet pop stars and you do these interviews and do all these things. Well, that's not Richard, who sits on the sofa lost in his thoughts in the evening and wondering about when all this is going to end. This is this bright lights, jazz hands. And the weird thing about radio is no one sees that because for the obvious reasons. But I was really good at switching it on, really good.
Did it exhaust you though? Because I mean, I definitely have got to a point in life where I just can't be bothered to almost put up the facade anymore. It's almost as though it's such a relief just to be able to be me and to actually, as we were having a conversation earlier, just saying, yeah, I've got my quirks and maybe they'll change going forward, but maybe they won't. And actually that's part of the, I think, healing journey, is coming to that realization that I only really want to be surrounded by people who accept me for where I'm at on my journey.
Yeah, I agree. I'd say uh, five, 6 years ago, it began to unravel. And I realised that I was being Rich Clarke 90% of the time. And even when I was at home, I wasn't being me. I was being this act with my friends. When I was out, when I was meeting people, I was just putting this thing on. And uh, you said it. Does it feel exhausting? It's not tiring because you don't realise you're doing it until something happens. And things started to happen that were having a bigger effect on me than they should have done. And I didn't realise tiny little drops were turning into huge explosions in my head. And eventually, I didn't realise that I wasn't sleeping. I knew I was getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I knew that I wasn't going back to sleep. But I knew that, but I can do it because I'm Rich Clarke. Ta-da. I didn't realise that that's insomnia, and that's really bad. And I went to the doctors and said, I'm not sleeping. And I remember that night, the night before, I'd hadn't noticed that I was reaching for a drink at 4 o'clock in the morning to get me back to sleep. and I was hiding that. You know, I was hiding that from everyone. I was topping up. I did have a what do you call it when you keep whiskey in a
Drinks cabinet.
yeah, and I had a big glass container with the whiskey on the top of the drinks cabinet. I'd just top it up so no one noticed that I'd had a drink at 3 or 4 in the morning. It's not a problem. That's fine. Was it exhausting? Now I know, with hindsight, yeah, it was exhausting. And that led to lots of problems. One big, I call it a breakdown because that's what the doctor called it, but I don't really like saying that word. One word, breakdown. But yeah, putting on the act for 25 years, it's too much.
Do you think a lot of people in that industry of presenting and who, I mean, I guess celebrity as well, because you do come into close contact with a lot of celebrities, but being on the other side, do you think a lot of people around you were also struggling with their own identity and other stuff that was going on mentally?
Yeah, absolutely. It's prolific. I mean, I think there are lots of problems that I now know of that was causing this issue, and I've dealt with them. I'm saying that hesitantly, but I can cope with them now. I have coping mechanisms, and I can. But I've spoken to other people who, behind closed doors, are going through the same thing, and it turns out I wouldn't change my career for the world because my career has been exactly what I wanted it to be. But I wish I had spoken to people about how I was feeling, because I was being Rich Clarke all of the time. And I was really good at it. I was great at hiding. I was good at being this happy, fun. Yeah. It's exhausting. I keep using that word, but it is. And I know of other cases, and I've given advice to other people who I saw were doing what I was doing, and just putting this front on, and I wouldn't want them to go through what I went through, because waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning and being awake is not normal.
And what made you get help? So you had a breakdown, and then what did that sort of reveal?
When you say breakdown, you don't do that with your fingers. I feel like I have to do that. It's because the doctor I wouldn't have called it a breakdown, because I don't really know what a breakdown is, but the doctor called it that.
What did it look like, your breakdown? So what happened?
So for probably months, I was getting up out of bed. I'm hesitant now because it was years. I was waking up, and that was it. And every night I would get home, I'd pour myself a drink because I knew that would send me to sleep. And then I'd go to bed, and I'd wake up at 1 o'clock, and I'd wake up at 2 o'clock, 2:05, 2:30, 2:45, and then I'd just give up. And then I was awake. And that would happen 5-6 nights a week. And on that one night, I realised almost a mirror turned on myself, and I saw myself awake and having drink at 3 o'clock in the morning with the thought that it's going to get me back to sleep. And I couldn't stop crying. I cried from the time I got up to the time I think the next night. I literally could not stop crying. So that's why, I've just always thought a breakdown would be more dramatic than that, not just lots of endless tears. But I text my closest friend and said, I need help. And here we are. They don't answer at 3 o'clock in the morning if you text your friends, incidentally, but they do at 6 when they wake up. And I got help, and I went to the doctors and got therapy, and I got help, and then began the process of working out why all this had happened to me, And I now know why all of this had happened to me. And I didn't realise that I was carrying quite a lot of weight. And so the reason I'm hesitant to use the word breakdown is because I don't really see it as a breakdown. It was a good eureka moment that needed to happen to release this kind of and it happened, and I can talk about it now.
And what do you think were the underlying causes now of the breakdown and going back to childhood? What laid the foundation for that insecurity and
Well,
not feeling good enough?
I'm gay, and I haven't been able to say that for and probably the last couple of years I've only been able to say that. In fact, I said it for the first time on stage at Brighton Pride, and I was introducing the next act, and I went on stage and said, "Hello, my name's Richard Clarke and I'm gay," and everyone cheered, and I had to hold back the tears because it was like this amazing moment, because I never understood why my friends who were younger than me liked being gay. I mean, they loved it. They were fine. They went to gay clubs. They did all the things that gay people do, and they didn't want to be anything else other than who they were. That made no sense to me at all, because I didn't want to be gay. I didn't realise I was gay. I thought something had gone horribly wrong. And I should say, as an underlying thing, that I've had a partner for 20 years who's a man. So obviously I'm gay. Obviously I am. But I wasn't going to go to Pride and wave a flag. And I'm certainly not going to walk down the street holding his hand. And why would I be proud of... I don't want to be. I want to be straight. And I think that was the kind of the catalyst, almost the cause of the problems later on, that I hated it. I didn't want it.
You made quite an illuminating comment before we started recording that was, if I could take a pill that would make me straight, then I probably would. And why is that? Do you still feel that stigma and shame being attached to someone who's gay?
I'm not ashamed anymore. No. The one thing that I think how brilliant it is that I've just passed two men holding hands walking down the street, and isn't that's how it should be. That's normal. That's brilliant. That's amazing. I know that for much of my life I didn't want to be this way, so it's very difficult to suddenly start thinking, oh, I'm going to hold my boyfriend's hand and walk down the street, because there's 80% of my life I wouldn't have done that, because I would have taken that pill and I would have turned out to be straight. And I think I grew up at a time in the 90s, when being gay wasn't normal. It wasn't okay to be gay in the 90s. It just wasn't. There was nobody to look at and go, I didn't even know I was gay. I didn't know what gay wasn't a word. It was just, I grew up in Worcester, which is this city in the countryside where, there's more sheep than there are people. So there certainly aren't going to be any gay people. Completely wrong. But in 1994, when you're at school and you're the only kid who feels different, that's weird.
When did you realise that you were gay?
I never have. That's the answer to that. I've never had a moment where I go, because through my 20s, I had a girlfriend till I was 22, 23. I had friends telling me that I was gay. Probably because I sat like this whenever we went out. But I've never gone realised. I've never had a moment. I knew that when I split up with my girlfriend, and I knew that I had to get on with this, because okay, these are the cards I've been dealt, so this is it. But I've never come out. I've never told my parents. I've never told my family. They know, of course they do. And I've got a podcast out where I talk about being gay. So if they haven't worked it out by now, then. But I've never come out. I've never had a moment where I've gone, ta-da.
And do you think that's a relief in a way, or do you think that was a form of avoidance?
Avoidance. Well, anything you do it, admitting, as I saw it, fault. I didn't think it was. I thought it was a mistake. I mean, that can't. Why would that happen to me? I haven't done anything wrong, but I didn't think that was okay. Isn't it brilliant now that kids growing up think it's all right? There's a lot to deal, there's a lot to unpack, but there's support now. I'm amazingly lucky because I've never experienced anything within my family or friends that have been anti who I am and being gay. No one's been against it. No one's had a problem. And my very good friend who I went to university with, she was there through all of this. She was one of the friends who said, "When are you going to wake up?" And she tells me now how she sees a very different me to what it was when I was just quashing this feeling of being gay.
Yeah, because it must be, so exhausting knowing, even if it's on a subconscious level, just knowing that you're not living in alignment with really who you are. And I think it gets to that point, doesn't it, that we only change when the pain of not changing outweighs the pain of actually stepping into the change itself. And suddenly, actually, it can be this huge release. Did you find that when obviously you didn't have an official coming out, but when you entered into your first gay relationship, did you feel a weight lifted off your shoulders?
Well, no, because I'll tell you what happened when I went into I've always been in long relationships, 20 years with my current partner, 6 with the partner before that. And I attribute that to the fact that I didn't want to be on the scene. So I'm not dismissing those relationships because I'm desperately in love with my current partner and I was in love at the time. But as soon as I got someone, that's it. I'm sticking with this person because then I haven't got to go and look for someone else. I haven't got to date. Two men dating? I haven't got to go to gay bars. I haven't got to go to clubs. There weren't apps then, but there were certainly online things. I haven't got to do that. I can just be with this partner. That's fine. If anyone comes to stay, then it's my housemate, and they'll move into the spare bedroom, and we'll make that spare bedroom look like it's always their bedroom, and we'll pretend that we're very good friends. I mean, the stupidity of that. When I moved around the country for my job and my housemate went with me. I mean, you look how ridiculous it was, but that's what happened. Because I don't want my mum and dad to be disappointed. I've got a gay son. Well, I don't want that. And my nan, I didn't want my nan to know. All of these stupid thoughts in my head that I just thought, I can hide this, I can get away with this, I can be Rich Clarke, just carry on, be fine, no one's going to know. And I've got my partner now, so that'll be us now until we're 90. I don't need to do anything. That first relationship ended, and I think that was the time when if there was a moment of coming out, that was it. Because I rang my dad and said, this person has moved out. Has moved out. Because he was a housemate, remember? And Dad said, oh, thank God for that. It was really bad for you, Richard. It was really bad for you. Because he knew we were in a relationship. Of course he did, and my mum did. And they must have had upset conversations between them in their lounge, talking about it. Of course they must have. But I guess that was me coming out to my parents, because then I met someone else, and my nan always asks after him. It's like it's such a ridiculous situation. But I know now that all of that uh, was part of the reason why I had the breakdown a few years ago, and it's a lot to carry.
Will you tell us a bit about your podcast, This Was Always Me? Has it been a cathartic process for you in starting it? And have you felt a shift in that regard? Have you felt like you can own it a bit more? Or do you still play out that narrative in your head that I know I'm gay, but I'm not openly going to sort of, I know, volunteer the information necessarily or hold my partner's hand when we walk down the street?
It's not just me. I think that's the thing I've learned from the podcast. It's been um, cathartic. Is that? I mean, it's kind of because I feel like that's almost a bit selfish of me to say that. It's been joint therapy. I think the conversations that we've had and what's been really important about it, nobody's telling these stories. Mine is tiny compared to some of the others. The baggage, the stuff that people have carried and been weighed down by for years, and nobody is talking about it because now, brilliantly, we're so proud of who we are, and we have events where we can celebrate who we are. Um, that hasn't been the case, and I spoke to in the first episode. I spoke to Kelly Holmes, and her her experience is very different to mine because she didn't have a problem with being gay. What she had a problem with is that she was in the army, and to be gay in the army was an offence, and you were thrown out. And she thought that she would be thrown out even long after she was in the army if they found out that she was gay. Then her whole Olympic career, her her whole life could be destroyed because the army could tarnish her with that brush. So hers was a story of shame, um, and there are people who I've spoken to. There's a lady, a trans lady called Isabel, who had surgery aged 80, and she lived in the wrong body for her whole life, and I can't even imagine what that must have been like. And what's been really interesting, having recorded the episode, are the numbers that we've had to really be very careful because it usually leads to something pretty heavy. I self-harmed when I was hiding my sexuality. I would punish myself because why can't I just be me? Why am I doing this? The stories of people who self-harmed, it's staggering. Suicide, there's that was a theme that people got to the point where they didn't want to have to come out, so it's easier just to end it. So that's why I was hesitant to say cathartic, because it's these are people's experiences, and I now know that I haven't been through this on my own. This is so common, and I don't think many people not in the community, I don't think they realise that we've all sort of carried this. And there's something that's really important called Section 28, and this was a law that was in place when I was at school, that you weren't allowed to promote homosexuality at school. So in sex ed, they couldn't talk about being gay. I think that's caused so many problems. As if somebody at school, a teacher, had said, the way you're feeling is okay, I don't think I would have had such a problem with it. And I think most of the people I spoke to in this podcast, which is called This Was Always Me, because they're proud of who they are now, I don't think these people would have had a problem with it either.
It is so interesting, and yet it's so sad to hear, isn't it, that people are crippled by so many constraints, and you sort of think, I think in this day and age where we think that LGBTQ has got so much awareness around it that it's just not really an issue anymore. Whereas I think listening to you speak, what is highlighted is that people with the individual can still be really crippled by their own self-judgment, and that can be self-imposed, or it can come from childhood, a story you tell yourself, and essentially there's that saying that we are the stories we tell ourselves, and until you unravel that story and start accessing it, it becomes very hard to create a new narrative and to really step into that identity with confidence.
I agree. And, someone who's 14 who's growing up now, and they look to people who are in the public eye, and Tom Daley is a great example of this. And when I was 14, well, I didn't have that. Now it's great, but that still doesn't get you past the point of, am I okay with this, or do I want this to stop? And that's a big question that everyone who may not realize that they identify in the community yet, but everyone has to do that. Am I okay with it, or do I want this to go away? And if the route is I want this to go away, which it was for me and it was for quite a few people on the podcast, I just urge people that there are other options, and you need to speak to someone, because you're not on your own.
You're not. And I mean, even reading Tom Daley's story, and his partner Lance, who was assaulted in a nightclub in London, and they've had to move to LA as a result. And you just think, gosh, it's scary that such vitriol still exists towards homosexuals and towards lesbians and whatever. I mean, the world isn't such an all-embracing place, which is why the LGBTQ movement is still so alive and has so many ardent supporters. And it's really important to raise that awareness.
I think so. And there's an episode on the podcast with Nick Gibb, who was a Conservative Member of Parliament. And it's really interesting because I mentioned Section 28 that was brought in under Margaret Thatcher's government. So it was a Conservative policy. And it's interesting that Nick Gibb and his husband were in a relationship for many years. I think they're just about to celebrate their 40th year together. And they hid it whilst he was a Member of Parliament. He didn't come out till 2015. And the reason I mention that story is because I think so many people will be able to relate to it. They didn't celebrate Christmas together as a couple until 2015. Neither did I. I didn't, because why would I be having Christmas with my housemate? They would, if people were coming to stay, one of them would stay in a hotel. His partner, who's now his husband, wouldn't go down to the constituency because they didn't want to be seen together. They wouldn't go to the cinema because they didn't want to be seen together, because he was a Conservative Member of Parliament. And during the early 90s, when the Conservative sleaze stories were in the press, he didn't want to be found out, and he wasn't doing anything wrong, but they would go out running in separate directions because they didn't want the tabloid press to take a picture of them. Now, it's remarkable. But what's also remarkable is the amount of people. He tells a story about how he remembers flyers being handed out at Westminster, anti-gay literature, saying that the gays are taking over and it's really bad. Well, in 2025 we can laugh at that, but that's happened. That was a thing. And it was perfectly fine for you to hand out a piece of literature saying, don't vote for them because they're gay. It staggers me, but I grew up with that. That's what it was like in the 90s. That was.
I know, and we kind of can't really fathom how the world was then. But even now, I have a friend in America, and he's in a gay relationship, and they have 2 kids. And he was saying even when they check into a hotel, he takes the kids in and checks in at reception while the partner goes and deals with the car and stuff. And then they go up to the hotel bedroom because they don't want to be seen to be checking into a hotel as a gay couple with children, because they don't want to subject the children to potentially an awkward situation or for them to hear some untoward comment. And it's...
I still do that.
Do you?
Yeah. So the number of times I had to come out at hotels because I'd turn up with my partner and they'd say, you booked a double room. Yeah. So even now, if I'm checking into a hotel with my partner of 20 years, he'll stand back and let me check in, or he'll check in and I'll stand back so that we're not seen as together. Because that awful, it's a double room. I will only book I only book chains now. I just book big hotel because I know that that's not going to happen. I wouldn't book a small boutique cute. I just wouldn't. And that's ridiculous because that's not going to happen now, but that's ingrained. I don't want to come out to the hotel reception desk, and I don't want to, every time I leave, you're looking at me going, oh, there they go.
I wonder how much of that is your perception or actually how much of that does happen. I mean, it's so hard, isn't it? I mean, we all feel it on different levels. And as we were discussing, it's all about you're your own worst judge and your own worst enemy, right? So we're judging ourselves, and in doing so, we think everyone else, or we assume we know what everyone else is thinking. When in fact, are they thinking that? No. Well, the hotel receptionist himself might be gay. So in fact, you never quite know. But I do, yeah, I do find it shocking that it is still a thing, and I think it's a protective measure, isn't it? It's sort of, if it potentially does go wrong, you don't really want to be at the receiving end of that sort of awkward moment, sort of awkward comment, whatever it is.
Yeah, people have said things, and I've I, I'm thinking of two examples. This is within the last few years. A producer said to me, "Oh, you and your partner have been together a long time, haven't you?" Yeah, yeah, we've been together a long time. Which one's the boys? Which one's the girl? And I just, what? That happened, really happened. And I remember when I started hosting a show with a female, with a lady, and she's a straight lady, and she had a lot of relationships, or she was in a relationship. I can't remember. She was in a relationship. I was in a relationship. So I said, "Can I talk about my male partner? Can I say I went home and he did this, or have I got to?" And they said, "No, you should keep it generic, just because. Just try and keep it non-gender. I went home and they did this." Okay, right, but she's allowed to say him because she's straight, but I'm not allowed to say him because I'm gay. Thanks.
So when you went to the doctor and were diagnosed with a breakdown, as we say, quote unquote, inverted
Yeah.
commas, what then happened? What treatment did you seek? What help did you get?
So I I'm I got talking therapy. I managed to. I was hugely skeptical. I didn't want to do that. I thought it'd be an absolute waste of time. And I joked about it because I was being Rich Clarke. I said, "Well, I'll do it if they've got a big leather chair for me to sit in and do all that." It was brilliant. It was just brilliant. We'd had quite a few sessions, and
Do you know what type of talking therapy it was?
no, have no idea. I'm not very good at that. It's the same as I have something wrong with me. I never Google it. I had no idea what it was. I had to answer lots of questions to the doctor and somebody else to find out what I should be doing, and they gave me this therapist. We did this. We had a number of sessions, and it was exhausting. Was the first thing to note. If I was doing it and then going on air afterwards, that was not a good idea. It was so exhausting. I mean, that's a positive thing because I was unpacking so much stuff. And we did, I mean, this may tell you what type of therapy it was, I don't know, but we did this exercise where we we sat opposite each other, and then I said all of my problems to the person. And then the therapist, we swapped seats, and the therapist said all of the problems that I had said back at me, so I could hear what I was dealing with. And I had another moment of lots of bawling because actually I think hearing the things that you're going through coming back at you is you kind of accept it, because I was putting it on an act. Even going to therapy was a bit of an act. I just put on this thing, but suddenly the tables had turned, and this person was saying, "You're struggling with this. You're struggling with this. You're struggling with this," and I thought, "Oh, yeah, I am." And that was kind of a turning point where I think we had about 20 odd sessions, I think, and it was really useful. I gave up alcohol. I went on a tablet that is an antidepressant, but I don't know what it's called. It begins with an M, and it helped me to sleep, and um, and my friends knew, and that was the biggest thing. Is that I have some really close friends, and they all knew, and they suddenly connected the dots and realised why I was behaving the way I'd been behaving up to that point. Um, and I think that was probably the biggest. And I mean, I've kind of left my partner out of this conversation, but I could speak to him, and I realised actually he was also struggling and needed help because he didn't know how to deal with me and this and what I was coping. And yeah, and there we go. I kind of got help, had therapy, gave up the booze, which is a wonderful thing to do. Do you know, I don't miss it at all. I do not miss it. And I started on, I assume, antidepressants, and I journaled a bit. I found that quite useful. I'm not very good at it. You always talk about meditation on this, but you have people on who talk about meditation. I wish I could. I've tried it so many times and I just can't. But I found journaling quite useful. I found it a form of that.
Well, it is a form of meditation. I don't meditate. I think mindfulness, meditation, journaling, talking, I think, you've got to find what works for you. And you do hear these gurus who sit and meditate for an hour or even just 10 minutes every morning, but you can do it in multiple ways. And I think you've just got to find what works for you. And I don't like this onus on thinking, oh God, I've got to do that because otherwise I'm not doing it properly. It's actually just, it's a release in some way, I think.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's the thing that helped with journaling is that I could identify problems, and because I was writing them down, and I was coming back from Heathrow and I was driving home, and I had a complete panic attack because it was raining. I didn't know where I was going. Have an electric car for my idiocy that I got it, and I didn't have enough charge, and I just had to stop, get out of my car, and just have this moment. And apparently that's a form of anxiety. I didn't realise that I was having this moment, but I showed it to my therapist, and she asked me to list other moments where that's happened. And it turns out it's happened quite a lot, that I'm getting anxious about things. And we spoke before we started recording about how I now wear earplugs when I'm at concerts or in busy places, just to block out some of the noise because I can't cope with it. It's too much. And I think what I think calling it journaling is a bit grand because I just write things down. But it's identified problems or things that I need to address, and that's what I found incredibly useful. I write a lot less things down now because I'm addressing those things. And I think what's really interesting with the podcast is I think we all have in common, all the people I've spoken to, we all kind of have the same story, really. Different angles and elements of that story, but none of us have really been authentic. None of us have been ourselves. We've all hidden it, and therapy lets you actually talk about you and yourself, and writing things down you're able to express that. So it's a long answer to your short question, but I think you just find a way to deal with it. Yeah, and I found a way that works for me.
And do you think that almost climaxed in you being able to stand on that stage in Brighton and say, I'm rich and I'm gay?
Yeah, that was probably one of the best moments of my life. And how lucky I was that I was able to do that. I mean, there was one episode of the podcast, and we finished recording it, and I said, do you know, I'd urge anyone to go on stage at Brighton and say, hello, I'm gay. And of course, no one gets the chance to go on stage at Brighton and say, hello, I'm gay. But I did get the chance to do that. And having 40, 50,000 people cheer back at you just because of your sexuality is like, that's powerful. And also, I hope that 40,000 people cheered that. You are not on your own. Everyone who identifies in this great spectrum, this great umbrella, has been through this self-acceptance, because you have to. It's taken some of us a lot longer than others. It's taken me quite a long time. But we've all had to make that decision. And I'm all right with it now, I think. Yeah.
And do you volunteer that information now at all to your friend? I mean, did you find that led to, so was it almost then like a release and a way that you could then communicate with other people, other friends? Have you since said I'm gay?
Uh, yeah, yeah, I think so. I, do you know what's really interesting is that I still haven't come out to my parents. And my friends want me to sit down with my mum and dad and say, I'm gay. They don't know my mum and dad. I don't know, maybe that would be an exercise that I probably should do, but I haven't. And I don't, I don't know.
What's your fear? What do you think they would say?
I don't think they'd say anything bad. I just don't like this idea of the situation. I think my dad would just pat me on the back and go, all right, son, and then just carry on. I think they're particularly, bothered, and I think they've been through that. I think when they saw me in 1994 absolutely obsessing about Jesse Spencer on Neighbours, who was Billy Kennedy, if anyone remembers
I
that.
remember. I do.
Do you
remember.
really?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
I didn't.
He was very beautiful.
But do you remember he used to wear red Speedos pretty much in every episode? And I realised, now I know, of course, because I was gay. But at the time, I didn't realise why I had to tell my mum to be quiet because Billy Kennedy was doing a scene. You know, I'm like, it's so ridiculous, isn't it? Yeah, I'm not very good with awkward situations. So I think, Mum, Dad, I've got something to tell you. I don't think it would be a moment, but you're looking at me like you're saying you should do this.
Yeah, I am. I want you to report back to me in 6 months' time that you've role played the situation and you've actually just gone in and you completely lost all sense of fear. I think you'd find it an immense release.
But I brought a podcast out about...
I know, but I just think it's those things you avoid, isn't it, that become these. I mean, I know from experience with OCD, it's almost like they become these insurmountable fears and you build them up in your head to be something, and it's almost just busting that demon or that critic in your head that's telling you can't. It's almost just like unblocking something that would just be so easy to do.
And you've done that.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me with this I mean, I on an ongoing basis in a very different way with OCD, because you have to constantly do that. You have to always go right when your brain wants to go left, and it's facing up to those things that you just think, oh gosh, it would be too difficult, or I've just got too much fear. No, I'll leave that. And it's a gradual process, and obviously you have to create a hierarchy. But it just sounds to me like you stood on a stage in front of God knows how many thousands of people and said it. And I don't know, I can't help but think, sitting here and talking to you, that it would just be just a part of your healing process.
See, I'm hesitant. Go, okay, I'll do that. It's. I don't. Yeah.
No, maybe you're not.
I agree with you.
Eventually...
I think it's a good. I think it would be a good thing to do. But yeah, let's.
Do you think it's because it makes it more like finite, and it's like so intimate with your parents, so they know you best out of anyone? Is it almost like the finality of it?
I think it's. I think there's two sides of it. I think there's the fact that I have been through so much. This sounds heartless. I don't mean this to sound heartless, but I've been through so much without my parents. They don't realise. No one realises that you go through this on your own, which is the problem. But that I did. I went through this on my own, dealing with this horrible feeling that I didn't want. So to bring my parents into it, it feels a bit weird. And then the other side of it is I'm from Worcester, and we're all tough farming people. We don't go around saying I love you and all of that. We're all, do you know what I mean? It's quite a leap to go to my mum and dad and say, Mum, Dad, something I've got to tell you. And the laziness in me, because remember, I am a presenter, so I am ultimately lazy. I don't need to, do I? Because I've got a podcast, and the first thing I say on the podcast is, hello, my name's Rich Clarke and I'm gay. So just listen to that. Does it, doesn't it?
But it's easier, isn't it, in some ways, when you're also in front of an input. It's impersonal when you're presenting, when you're on a podcast. Like I can sit in this room and I don't know who's listening to this podcast. There, as far as I'm concerned, there are 5 people listening, and essentially including me, and it could be broadcast to, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of people or just 200 people. But it is slightly easier when they're not all in the room and you're not in front of them and you don't have a close relationship with them. And I think those that you have an intimate relationship with can sometimes be almost the most fearful people in your life, in a way.
There's judgment, isn't it? That's the thing. I think part of the, when I was doing the therapy, and part of the reason of the breakdown is that I sit in a room every day with my radio show and I talk to 500,000 people but can't see any of them and nobody claps. So was that any good? I don't know. Was it? I thought it was rubbish. I am the worst critic of myself, and you don't really get praise or congratulations. I think I probably did, but I didn't see it because so I think looking somebody in the eye, and you doing this podcast and looking them, we're having a conversation, but my mum and dad, and sitting down and telling them, that would be Richard doing that, not Rich Clarke. I think a lot of my problems have been because I've sat behind this ridiculous Rich Clarke. And I think the reason we did that exercise in therapy was because my therapist became Rich Clarke and said it all back to me. And Richard had to listen to it. I mean, it sounds utterly pretentious the way I'm talking at the moment, but I hope saying it on this podcast, some of your listeners might understand that you do put this...
It's an alter ego in a way,
It's an alter ego.
We all have one.
And I do it for my job. If I went on air, I did the drive show on a big radio station. If I went on air at 4 o'clock and said, oh, God, I've had a day. I'll tell you something about my day. Oh, it's been terrible. Well, you can't. The radio station was about feel good. You've got to...
Maybe that's why I haven't gone viral yet, Rich. It's all too deep and down.
These are important conversations. These are much more important conversations than me hitting a vocal on an Ollie Murs song. This is so much more important. And, I've realised now that I'm not doing that programme and I'm not working on that radio station. And I've done this podcast. And I realise now that actually what I enjoy the most and what I get the most out of, if I'm going to be selfish, is having a conversation. And I've spent far too much of my life just projecting this brilliant image. Yay! But I'd rather have 3 or 4, 5 dimensions. I'd rather know more things about someone who I'm talking to, and I'd much rather that than hitting the vocals on an Ollie Murs song. I was very good at it.
Do you think that's something that changes with age? Because it's definitely something I've noticed, that as I get older, it's almost like I don't care as much about what the world thinks, but I care about what I think of myself and actually how I'm living each day. And if I get to the end of the day and I'm a bit disappointed with who I showed up as that day, it kind of just leaves me feeling a bit empty. And I guess it's a work in progress, because I don't necessarily show up all the time as the person I want to be, but I'm much more aware of the person that I want to be inside, as opposed to the person that I want people to think I am, if that makes sense.
But do you say to those people, if you don't feel like you've given it all 100%, will you then text those people and say, I'm really sorry, I didn't feel like I was on it? Or do you just dismiss it and... Oh, well.
Well, as in if I went to a meeting or I saw a friend and I didn't feel like I showed up as the best version of myself. Yeah, sometimes I will with good friends. I'll be like, if there's something going on and I'm particularly anxious, I will message them and I'll just say, I had supper with a friend the other week and I didn't feel I was on great form, and I just said, look, I'm really sorry. I've got this sort of injury at the moment. I'm feeling a bit down. I'm really anxious. There's just a lot of uncertainty sort of going on, and I'm not really coping that well. And sorry if I didn't feel like I fully engaged this evening. But I think it comes from a place of like, I know that I might have been distracted, and maybe when I get more confident, I won't have to do that, and the apology won't matter, because I think often those of us who are highly sensitive will judge ourselves far more than those around us will, and that goes back to our earlier conversation as well. And so I think sometimes it's actually like, okay, where's that coming from in me? Like, why am I actually judging myself so much? Why am I being so overly critical of myself? Because ultimately we know as humans, most people are so self-absorbed, they don't necessarily notice unless they're seriously sensitive themselves. And so, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. And it's not it's not I guess it's not such an attractive trait to always be going around apologizing for who you necessarily showed up as that day. Oh God, I'm really sorry, because people don't want that either. People do, as you say, they're attracted to confident people, and they're attracted to people who are up and who are, appear to be full of vitality, and who bring them up with them. So I'm not sure. It's an interesting question.
So switch the apology and don't apologize. And I think that's what I've learned. If I know that I'm meeting a friend, and I only have a few friends now, I think that's really important to have some really good, strong friends. I meet them, they get me. They don't get the act. They get Richard now. And I will say to them, I'm not feeling great, or I was in a bad place, or I don't apologize, because I'm trying to be honest with you. And actually, I'm not sorry, because this is a real thing that I'm going through. So I think when you apologize, unless you do something absolutely ridiculously stupid, of course, which you should apologize for. When you apologize for something, you're not accepting how you were behaving. And if you went for dinner or supper with your friend, and you weren't the greatest company, and then you apologize. Why are you apologizing? You still showed up. You still went. You're still being you. You're still being authentic, and that's what I'm learning. If I go to something and they're not getting as much fun from me that perhaps they normally would, I don't think my friends are particularly bothered anymore, because they know what I've been through. So I'm certainly not going to apologise for that. But I will say, look, I'm struggling today. I still want to see you. I still want to meet, and I still want to do these things all. But I'm struggling. I'm having a hard time. And actually, that's the thing I find really difficult with my partner. And he showed me this amazing, ridiculously stupid thing that you could buy that someone's just invented to make some money. But it was like a little toy that you just put on the side that showed that you weren't feeling great without having to say you're not feeling great. It was just one thing. You just put it on the side in the kitchen, and that he'll see that and go, okay, right, got it. And I don't, because I struggle to say, I'm struggling today, to him. I do it to my friends, really. I can't do it to him, because I just put this thing out now, and then he knows. You don't have to struggle with the words, but I don't apologise for it. And I'm not saying you shouldn't apologise if you do something stupid. You should, but I don't apologise for feeling down.
Yeah, no, and it's a very valid point, and I think it's something that I need to stop doing, because it comes from a place of my own insecurity, and actually it's just stepping into yourself more and more. And I notice myself doing it less and less, and you can still feel it and go away and sort of berate yourself for not showing up as who you necessarily wanted to be. But ultimately, yeah, we can all get triggered by different things at different points in a day, and you can be in the best mood on the way to see a friend, and then suddenly something happens, or you get sort of a deluge of thoughts, and you go from having a really sunny day in your head to it being a sort of thunderstorm. So I think, friends need to allow you to show up and be unapologetically you at all times. And I think with your partner and one's romantic partner, that's absolutely critical in a healthy relationship. So Rich, what does healing mean to you now, and what would you like to see change in the next 5 years? If you could look back now, what would you say to the future you?
I think confidence is something genuine confidence is something I've lacked. I'm confident. I go on stage. I'll introduce anything you like. I'll go in front of as many people, and I'll read a script, and I'll do it. I'm confident. I'm not confident. I don't put myself forward. I don't put myself out there. What I've surprised myself with this podcast, not necessarily, I'm not talking about the actual content of the podcast. I'm just talking about, I got this commissioned. That's who I want to be in 5 years. I want to push myself to do more things like that, and not have the voice in me thinking, oh, you're not going to sleep tonight if you do this. You're going to have to have a drink to get yourself through it, because it's utterly ridiculous. That voice is much quieter, but it's still there, talking to me, saying, you're rubbish at this. The evil voice. You are terrible at this. Why are you even bothering? Still there. And in 5 years' time, I hope the volume is down at least another 3 notches on the dial. But it still sits on my shoulder. I'll walk out of here and go, ooh, that wasn't very good. What did I do? Because that's what I do. I think, yeah, in 5 years' time, I just want to remember where I'm at the moment. And it's gone all right so far. So keep going.
Rich, you've been so generous with your time, and thank you for coming all the way from Southampton to be with us here today. It's been a real honour.
Thank you so much for asking me.